There is a very intricate relationship between the race engineer and the driver. We'll explore how the drivers and race engineers rely on each other to communicate data and driver feedback on this episode of the Roundtable, presented by Arrow Electronics. Okay, welcome to another edition of the Roundtable, presented by Arrow Electronics. Today we've got the 5 race engineer and 5 driver, and the 7 race engineer and the 7 driver. We're going to talk about what it takes for this relationship to be the best. There's a lot of teamwork, a lot of communication, a lot of trust involved. We're going to get into all of that. On my right, I've got race engineer Will Anderson, the driver of the 5 car, Pato Award. Got the driver, the number 7 car, Felix Rosenqvist. And we've got the race engineer for the 7 car, Blair Perschbacher. All right, so everybody knows what the drivers do. You see it on TV. You guys are the cool, popular guys.
Do we do a good job?
We'll see at the end of the year. But, I want to talk about what the race engineers do. What's a day in the life of the race engineer? And I suppose, it probably starts at the shop leading up to an event. Will, what's it like?
Yeah, I think the race engineer's job is to take a lot of information from past years of what the driver had at certain tracks, and then incorporate all the other engineers. We have simulation engineer, damper engineer, aero guys, incorporate all of that and come up, before an event with a starting setup.
Yeah. Like we have all the tools, we've learned everything from the simulation engineer, the aero engineer, and then Felix and Pato go out and say, here's what the car is doing, and we have that information to make them more comfortable and faster.
Has there been a situation where what I tell you, and then you see the data and it's like, no?
I would say the interesting part to me about our job is we have all these tools that simulate what a mechanical car should do. And then the thing that we can't account for all the time is the drivers are kind of like a sensor, and each driver is tuned a little differently. And so there is that aspect of what you say, we have to try to figure out how to give that feeling to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like the race engineer is more of a psychologist than anything, because you basically do what a lot of other engineers do, but you have to take in what we say and filter out a lot of it, because as you said, sometimes it probably doesn't
match all the time.
Yeah. And I feel like when me and Blair, we started working this year, and in the beginning I would tell you something, and obviously you'd listen, you were like, okay, so we have to do this. But then now, when we worked for a few months, don't worry about him saying that, and don't worry about that. And then you take, it's always balancing what's actually...
Yes, useful, I think. You come in and you've driven the car and a lot of things, you're like, oh man, it's really bad in this corner. You're like, okay, well, you're good in that corner, so let's not worry about it. It's filtering out what you say and what we think, will give you the best chance of going faster. Yeah. Sometimes, you have to read into you. And like you said, we haven't worked together a lot, but once you get to know a driver, you know what you're keying off of, and that you're oh, he's saying this is really important. He's also saying this, that's not so important. We can move on to the next thing.
It's like a relationship. You build on it, and it's so important.
You've obviously got a whole team of people that are working to support you with the setup changes and otherwise. And then you've got these guys that may be contradicting what the simulation or otherwise is saying. How do you handle that? How do you balance that?
I think it's a lot of, especially on ovals, you got to go on the driver's feel, because we can make small changes that are efficient but very small that you wouldn't really notice if the driver can't extract the most out of it. Yeah. So I think it's kind of big on ovals to get the driver's feedback and then just do the most efficient thing that's going to fix his problem. We can take a little bit of downforce and a little bit of drag off, but it's going to make him uncomfortable, and he can drive better if he has a bit more downforce and a bit more drag. Yeah. You put it on, and then you're actually faster, even though efficiency-wise it's a little less than you could do optimally.
So simulators, it's obviously the way of the future for what we're doing. Track time keeps going down. We've got the simulation tool set, we've got the at-track piece, and then we've got the driver in the loop simulator, and it kind of goes in a big development circle. Where do you start?
Our offline simulation typically always starts with sort of post-correlation of a real track outing. Blair and I will have the simulation department run several pre-event sims for a specific event. They'll do a lot of sweeps, a lot of sims, different packages. You try to come up with an optimal direction, and then we typically will then take that to the driver in the loop simulator, and sort of confirm some of the feelings.
So it's a quick way, because we get 45-minute sessions at race weekends, and you'll get 2 changes, but we can try 20 changes in a simulator day, and then you can whittle those down to the 2 changes you want to try at the racetrack.
So that kind of builds your run plan, so to speak.
Yep.
How do you feel about the sim in terms of, obviously it is what it is. It's not a real car, but it's probably about as close as you can get.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think it's definitely worth doing. I think the hard thing with the simulator is that you can always make a pretty good job in replicating what you did with track conditions and tires and balance and all that, but the hard thing is to make it right for what's to come.
I'm not a big fan of it. Never really have been. I'm trying to be better at it. I do it because I know it helps you guys with simulations, and I want the team to get better and do better in race weekends. But man, it takes a lot of me to like keep my cool in it.
Well, and I think that's one of the kind of hard things about it is you're sort of playing a video game. You sit in the tub like the real car, but it doesn't move like the real car. So the feelings you guys get are different, and that's one of the things where it doesn't completely translate.
Especially when you're like fighting for tenths.
Yeah.
And it's just like, to get a decent lap in, it's like, okay, you do it. But then whenever you actually want to get tenths out of it, that's where you rely on every single feeling that you need in order to push.
It feels
to the
very
absolute
numb
limit.
on the limits.
Yeah.
So you go out on your baseline run. Me personally, I don't know how you guys can think about anything other than driving, but how do you drive at a top level and the entire time think about how you can make the car better?
And that's what you think about straight away. Like as soon as you leave the pits on a race week in the first couple of laps, you're like, oh, that didn't feel good. That felt good. I think we're strong here. We're slow there. The car feels weird there, but maybe all the others feel weird there because the wind is that direction. I mean, you try to process everything and just give the feedback, the best feedback you can to the engineers, and from there on, it's Blair's and Will's job to use that the best way they can.
And I think there's a lot of information the driver has to like remember, and we can put a lot of things on the steering wheel that like make it so he doesn't have to remember everything.
Yeah.
Like where do you use this, where do you use that, like breaking into pit lane, we can help him do that on the steering wheel so he's not having to remember. Like we have pages and pages of information we go through pre-event, and you're not going to remember it all when you're driving the race car. So there are a lot of things built into the steering wheel that helps him remember some of those things and just be efficient at getting everything out of the car.
Looking at the 2 drivers, Pato and Felix, it's kind of like we touched on earlier, like they are basically sensors in the car, and they're both calibrated a bit different. So Pato has adapted to a smaller steering wheel that really gives him the feedback he wants, and Felix really likes the larger steering wheel to give him the feedback and effort he wants. And then I think as far as working with us, it's just been a lot of, what information do you need to see on the dash to have the best race you can versus what information Felix might want to see on the dash. It's slightly different between them. I think, like tire pressures, temps, and brake temps, and that type of stuff you still look at, but we don't do quite as many like reminder tones for other things.
Well, it's interesting because you guys both have found success in the IndyCar series. You guys are both race winners, but you go about it in 2 totally different ways.
Yeah, I think it's just about finding what works best for you, because once you're in a series like this, everyone is good. Yeah. So you just have to make your life easier into finding what you like and then just trying to make things better from there.
And for you, when you're trying to relay information back to Will, what's the best way for you to do that?
I feel like I do a lot of motions.
You do, yeah. I think actually what helps out there is I used to drive when I was a kid, like karts. And so a lot of what Pato does, like emotions with his hands, are
he
like,
can relate.
Yeah, it's like feelings that I can relate to from driving and from karting. Like you can just kind of pick up on what he's saying, and like if you're just listening in the room, you'd have no idea what was wrong with our car. But just visually, like me seeing what Pato's just trying to describe, like it like clicks, and so it's a weird.
And the noises.
Yeah, it's
in a road course, boom, boom, and then it just feels like the front gets sliding. Bah, bah, bah.
So I get a lot of hand motions. I get a lot of like noises, and somehow just from my racing experience working with Pato more, like the more I'm able to sort of turn these noises into feedbacks that the car needs to give Pato.
The downshifts.
Clunky downshifts. I know that one.
Oh, there's been a lot of talk about
Yeah.
that one.
Been hammering.
How do you get your point across? What's the best way for you?
I feel the best way for me is I have better feedback the longer time I've been out of the car, which is, I mean, you need to give the feedback when you're in the car.
That's a good point.
But I try to do my best job with that, but it definitely gets better and better. And I feel like an hour after I've been out of the car, like I can give very good feedback.
From an engineering perspective, what are you dealing with in a race situation?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Blair and I look at in the race is we obviously have a ton of sensors on the car, all coming back to the timing stand with real-time telemetry, real-time data. And so a lot of what Blair and I will look at will be data compared to a lap or just compared to a practice session or something like that to get a feeling for what the drivers are dealing with. There's timing and scoring information on the stand where we try to relay to the driver by looking at our data, timing and scoring, hey, we're struggling in turn 2. It looks like we have a lot of understeer. Think about your front bar, think about your rear bar, think about something, and you try to feed that back into the driver to make improvements on the fly while you're in the race.
That's like where the relationship comes in, because then you can actually like close that loop. Like if you see on the data that X and Y is happening, then if you know us well, you will know, okay, he's gonna want less tire pressures in the front because he's dealing with this right now. And that's where I think you guys do a really good job, because most of the time it's actually like I come in for a pit stop and the car is way better than it was. So that's super important.
Yeah. What, Blair, wakes you up in the morning? What excites you about doing this?
Man, I think it's the competition and competing against other guys to find a better solution to the problem. Every couple of weeks, you're competing against somebody, and I've done better this week. If not, I can go back and change, and then I can come back in 2 weeks and see, can I do it better?
Yeah.
I think it's the competition.
What about you?
Winning. The higher the competition is, the better the reward. Just, the times that happen, it just gives you so much energy, and everything that you worked for, at that moment, it's just like, this is what I'm living for, and then you move on. You want to do it again.
What about you, Will?
I'd say I'm very similar to Blair. Week to week to week, you can continually make improvement, continue to innovate, and try to put a better product out there.
Yeah, for me, it's winning. Like there is nothing like winning, and it's honestly hard to explain what a win feels like in such a competitive series like IndyCar. It just feels like you really earned something.
Yep.
Yeah, I think what both of them said, like winning is the ultimate goal, and it's hard to do.
Yep.
And when you do it, there's so much satisfaction because you've done everything right. Like in this series, it takes to do everything right, and it doesn't happen every weekend. And you strive for it, and when you get it done, it's like so rewarding.
Yeah, I think that's for me is the thing, right? It's the process. Putting a good team together and building a culture where people expect to win. I think that's the exciting challenge that's in front of all of us. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to do it this year, and I think we all know that we're capable of it. And that's what gets me out of bed every morning, is knowing that we can show up at the racetrack and win races every weekend. So it's an exciting time. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Roundtable presented by Arrow Electronics.